My name is Karen Kafantiris, and I am an Associate State Director for AARP here in Michigan. I want to welcome you to our How to Build a Standing Raised Garden Box event. This is an event we had planned to do in person with our community partner, Capital Area Housing Partnership, as part of their HERO program. Their HERO workshops are great opportunities to learn do-it-yourself skills for home improvement projects. Their expert instructors guide participants through a project or show them how to solve a common home maintenance problem. However, the pandemic has changed everything, so we decided to pivot and make this a virtual event. If you like this event today and you want to see other virtual events that we're doing here in AARP Michigan, please go to either the AARP Michigan website or do a Google search for AARP Michigan virtual events. You can also find many of the virtual events that we have done previously on the AARP Michigan Facebook page. For example, you can watch the event we did last week with the Michigan Department of Insurance and Financial Services on what you need to know about the changes to the no-fault insurance law that takes effect July 1st. I'd like to bring your attention to a few things on your screen. This is the first is the question and answer area, which is at the bottom of your screen. You'll see two little bubbles that say Q&A. So you can click on that and enter your question. You should receive a response that says we've received your question so that you know that we have received it. Please only submit your question once. You can submit many questions, but please only do each question once. Also at the bottom of your screen is an icon that looks like two pieces of paper. This is where you'll find downloadable directions on how to build a standing garden box and a second document of tips and tricks. Today's event is going to be a combination of several short videos that we created showing the building of the standing garden box, along with live discussion with two presenters. I'd like to introduce those two presenters now and welcome them to the screen. Jim Kirschensteiner has been a volunteer with AARP Michigan for 9 years. Jim is a civil engineer who has previously worked for the Bureau of Public Roads, now known as the Federal Highway Administration, and retired from the United States Department of Transportation Federal Highway Administration in 2011 after 42 years of service. Jim enjoys reading, bicycling, walking, archery, kayaking, carpentry, camping, Civil War reenacting, model railroading, traveling, and most of all, spoiling his grandkids. Emma Henry is our second presenter today. Emma is the Assistant Executive Director for the Capital Area Housing Partnership. In her position, Emma manages the HERO program, identifies new single-family opportunities for development, manages new construction and rehabilitation projects from conception to completion, and assists with grant writing and fundraising. Capital Area Housing Partnership develops strong, diverse neighborhoods with a focus on affordable housing, home ownership, and financial security in mid-Michigan. I am now going to have Jim and Emma come on the screen and turn it over to Emma as we move into our program.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, everyone. First, we will start with the materials and tools video, and Jim and I will go through everything that you'll need to complete your standing raised garden bed.
Okay, from the materials list, we'll be using 11 cedar boards. Those are cedar boards right there. And in addition to those, we use 2 boxes of number 9 3-inch deck screws. And 1 box of the lag screws holding on to wire mesh at the bottom. And this is a photograph of wire mesh being tied down. And we also use landscaping fabric to insert inside of the box once it's completed.
You'll also need a couple tools and some equipment to help you with this. First of all, we used sawhorses and a couple pieces of wood to help us make our cuts, a circular or skill saw and a hand saw, a power drill, a couple wood clamps to hold our pieces together, wood file to make sure we remove those pesky splinters, tape measure to ensure that we are making proper cuts, snips for the wire mesh, combination and speed squares for those nice corners, framing square as well, and then of course safety equipment, N95 mask, earplugs, your soil and compost that you put in the box, and finally plants. Reminder, if you have any questions, please type them in the question and answer box, and then we will answer those as we go through the presentation. It looks like we already have a few questions. Jim, number one, how do you keep the weeds out of the box?
How do you keep what out of the box?
Weeds.
Oh, I think you probably have to just weed those out by hand.
I think sure. The benefit of the raised bed is that often you don't get extra weed seeds, and it's easier to weed since it's up at your hand height. Additionally, we have a question, will this presentation be recorded for future viewing? So yes, and at the end, there will be a link available for you to watch all of these videos over again at your own convenience. Now, Jim, do you have any tips and tricks in general when you're building the garden box?
Yeah, just a couple of things about the lumber. When you go to the lumber yard and buy cedar, it's not the same. Dimension, especially the 8-foot dimension, because it's not always 8 feet long, and it's kind of critical to get what pieces cut. So use your tape measure and measure the pieces. In addition, some lumber yards market material is called cedar. You won't really see that. It's usually yellow pine that's pressure treated, and it's dyed a cedar color. When you're interested in using cedar, make sure it's genuine cedar and not pruning.
Okay, thanks, Jim. It looks like we're having a little bit of feedback on your end. If you can make sure to talk loud, and hopefully that will help out. We have one more question. What do you fill the bottom of a tall box with if you don't want to fill it completely with dirt?
I think probably the best thing is just to not use the entire amount of dirt you need to fill the box. The wire mesh and the fabric will hold the dirt in, but there's really nothing else that you really need to put on the bottom there. Just don't put quite as much soil in it.
Sure, sounds good. It sounds like Jim's connection is a little bit better now, so if you could keep it that way, and then if there's anyone that's having trouble hearing, please just let us know in the chat. All right, so let's go on to our second video of measuring and cutting the lumber.
Okay, apparently the audio is missing there. What I'm doing there is using a new 8-foot long. Using a skill saw on a work platform, you want to adjust the depth of that skill saw blade so you don't cut your work platform up. That's what I just did there. I'll take that 8-foot long piece. We're going to be using a skill saw, so we're going to need to clamp that down so it doesn't move on us while we're working on it. This is a quick release clamp, just clamping one side of it. And you want to make sure that you wear appropriate protection, mask, ear protection, safety glasses, things like that, because skill saws can be quite loud. And I placed a square on that board we're going to cut, and I use that square for a guide to make our cut. And again, we're right between the two lines, the 4 feet from either end. Making that cut right between those two lines. And both of those boards will come out 4 feet. You can see the splinters coming off the skill saw, and that's why you need your eye protection and a mask. Those boards are going to be a little splintery on those ends. So we're going to use a file to knock off some of those splinters. You don't want to get those in your hand. Yeah, I marked my pieces that I cut with the length of those boards, because when you have a lot of pieces pre-cut, you want to make sure that you're picking up the right pieces to put where they belong. This one happens to be 4 foot 0 inches, so I've marked 4 foot 0 inches on the end of it. Another way to cut those boards is to use a handsaw. This is a cross-cut saw. I'm using a block of wood as a guide so that the saw is perpendicular to the wood. Make sure if you're using a cross-cut saw that it's a sharp cross-cut saw. You don't want to use dull tools. Dull tools don't work very well. We're cutting off one of the short pieces that's going to go into the legs for the flower box, or for the raised garden box.
Okay, reminder that you can still ask questions at the bottom of your screen in the Q&A section. We do have a few from that last video. The size of the box. Jim, what size box did we build here?
Okay, this box that we built was 3 foot by 4 foot on the outside. It's a little bit smaller on the inside, obviously, because of the thickness of the lumber. So it's roughly 3 foot by 4 foot, and the legs were 36 inches high. It seemed to be a good workable height for most people, 3 feet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now what is the overall cost of building this yourself?
Okay, the wire fabric, the fabric that was placed inside, all of those materials. It didn't include any labor cost, obviously, if you have someone else build it for you. But the total cost again was $180 just for the lumber alone. Those cedar boards cost about $10.50 each. So just for the cedar, it was $115.50.
Okay. And then we have a question, are the plans going to be provided at the end of this presentation?
I believe so. I believe all of the materials and the how-to and all the tips and tricks and things like that will be available for anyone that wants those.
Great. We have one follow-up question from earlier. Would it help at all to add a layer of gravel to the bottom of the box?
I really don't think you need the gravel, because the gravel there is to help drainage. And the bottom of the box has the wire fabric in it. So any excess water is just going to drain right out the bottom. So I don't think, I think it'd be just a waste of materials to put gravel in the bottom.
Okay, great. Do you have any special tips or tricks on the cutting section of this project?
Yeah, just a couple. When I showed you how to cut with a skill saw or a circular saw, the platform that I built was just a temporary platform on top of those sawhorses, but you don't want to cut up those boards. So when I set that blade depth on the circular saw, I just set it for 1/8 of an inch, approximately 1/8 of an inch greater than the depth of the cut. That way, when I cut across the boards that are made up my work table, I didn't cut those boards up too much. So that's one thing you want to make sure. Also, if you're using a handsaw, make sure that the handsaw is a sharp handsaw. You don't want to use dull tools. Dull tools just don't work very well. And you wind up working a lot harder trying to use a dull tool. And that pattern board, or that piece of wood that I used as a block with the hand, you put the blade right against that block of wood, and you'll be perpendicular to your cut. Just don't use anything metal, like your square, to cut against, because you'll wind up ruining your square and also dulling your handsaw.
Can something other than cedar be used, and what would the benefit of different types of wood be?
Sure, there's alternate designs that are out there that use pressure treated wood. Pressure treated wood is treated with chemicals, and we chose this cedar design basically because there wouldn't be anything that would be leached out from the cedar into the soil. If you're just planting flowers, probably pressure treated lumber is fine. You'd use a 2x12 pressure treated piece of wood. To build those kind of designs, all of the materials, your wood would be pressure treated. However, pressure treated wood can be quite heavy. If you've never tried to lift an 8-foot long piece of 2x12, it's very heavy, and it usually is a little bit wet, which adds to the weight. So you have to consider those things when you work on it, when you build a box with pressure treated wood.
If you use cedar wood, would you have to add any stain protection?
No, cedar is naturally protected. It lasts a long time. It won't quite last as long as pressure treated wood does. But if you've ever seen these old houses in New England that have cedar shakes on them, over time they turn black from the weathering. Any box that you make out of cedar is going to turn a darker color over time. It's just the way the natural character of the wood.
Okay, and now if you go to Home Depot, would they cut the boards to size for you so you didn't have to do that at home?
I believe so. I've never had to go to Home Depot to have them cut because I can do all of those things myself. But I believe they do for those that need the boards cut. So if you have plans, if you wanted to build the box set.
Okay, great. All right. Any other last comments about that section, measuring and cutting lumber, Jim? Tips and tricks?
Yeah. One thing that I used that I showed there, I clamped down the piece while I was cutting it. One rule of thumb is you can never have too many clamps. Also, when you're measuring materials, measure that material twice and cut once, because if you cut it in the wrong place, you'll never be able to add that material back on there. So measure twice, cut once, just an old carpenter's rule of thumb.
That's a good one. I've definitely heard that before. All right, let's move on to our next video. This one is building the legs.
Okay, now we're getting ready to build our legs. The legs are probably the most complicated thing of a raised garden box. I took 2 of the 3-foot long leg pieces, and I put one of the 4-foot long 2x4s on top of those 3-foot long pieces. We previously cut 2 short pieces. Those are 10 3/8 inches. And those are going to be the part of the leg that's on the ground. So I want to get those edges, those ends lined up. Line up the 10 3/8 inch piece with the edge of the 3-foot long piece. You'll have 4 of those 3-foot long pieces and 4 of the 10 3/8 inch long pieces. Get those lined up, both sides, with your 4-foot long 2x4 brace across those 2 legs. This is where you want to use your square. This is a big construction square. Make sure that the legs are squared up with that brace, that cross brace. You get a square, if you get all the pieces square at the beginning, it'll all come out right. And the drill bit that we use is a 5/32 inch drill bit. I used a guide to determine that drill size based on the screw size. The number 9 takes a 5/32. And I marked pilot holes, 2 pilot holes, in that 10 3/8 inch piece. The pilot holes can be placed just about anywhere as long as you have 2 on that short piece. I placed them about 1 inch from either end of that 10 3/8 inch. And you want it in the center of that 2x4 piece. Get your drill lined up. There's a bubble usually on the top end of the drill, and that'll tell you whether your drill is perpendicular to the piece or not. Again, marking pilot holes on the other side. It could be an inch, inch and a half, as long as you have 2 on this short piece. Drill your pilot holes. Make sure everything is flush. You can hold it down tightly and drill your pilot holes. These screws that we're using use a Phillips driver. Phillips is the shape, the configuration on the end of the screw. They're 3-inch long screws. Place them in the pilot holes and drill in place. Make sure that it's all lined up before you do that. Do the same on both of those 3-foot long legs. And we have both of those 10 3/8 inch long pieces in place, and we put that 4-foot brace against the top of those. And again, go back to your square and make sure everything is flush and square. Clamp one end down so it doesn't move on you. We drill 4 pilot holes in each end of that 4-foot long brace. We'll be using 4 squares on each end, or 4 screws on each end. You need the 4 screws on these ends so they don't wobble. Do the same thing on both sides. After we get done putting that 4-foot long brace in place, we'll be putting the 21 3/4 inch piece on next. The 21 3/4 inch piece will be where the sides of the box are attached. I'm marking out where my pilot holes are going to go. On this piece, you want to use probably 3 screws, 1 on either end and 1 in the middle. I was using an adjustable square, but you could use just about anything to get your dimension there. Just you don't want those pilot holes or those screws to be too close to the ends of those boards. Once you have it squared up and flush on the ends and the sides, clamp it down. Make sure it's snug up against the 4-foot brace. Drill your pilot holes. And once the pilot holes are drilled, then you can put the screws in place.
Okay, great. We do have a few questions. Remember that you can put your questions in the comment box at the bottom, the Q&A. Type those in and then we'll answer them for you. We do have one person that was wondering about a picture of the final product. So we will have that at the end. And I think that will help you get an understanding. It will also be on the materials list and we will share it throughout the presentation. Jim, we do have a question that someone used treated wood for a bed that they built on the ground, and they're wondering if that would cause harm.
Okay, it really depends on when that treated wood was made. Early versions of treated wood had chemicals that would leach into the soil, but I think it was maybe 10 or maybe 15 years ago or so, they changed the configuration of the chemicals in treated wood. So the treated wood that you buy today is safer than the older versions of the pressure treated wood.
Okay. Could you talk about the benefits of building the raised garden bed instead of building a bed on the ground?
Okay. Probably the biggest thing is you save your back. You can you don't have to bend over as much, and you're not kneeling on the ground. Um, it'll also keep animals out, pesky critters like rabbits, squirrel. Well, squirrels will go in and regardless, but rabbits nibble on a lot of young vegetation coming up. And if you have a raised garden box, you don't have to worry about rabbits. I'm always having rabbits eat up everything in my garden or when it first comes up. The other thing is you can place the raised garden box just about anywhere you want in your yard. You can put it right in the middle of the yard if you wanted to. It's not fixed because it stands up and you can move it. Just take the dirt out and move it and place it where you want it and put the dirt back in. So there are advantages to a raised box. You don't have to build it 3x4 either. You could build it longer, shorter, smaller, square, rectangular, any way you wanted to build it. So it has a lot of flexibility.
Great. In the video, you showed us choosing your drill bit diameter. Is that always how you would choose the same drill bit diameter for any kind of wood?
Well, I used a template which has various drill bit sizes marked off, and you can take the screw. For instance, this is one of the lag screws they're used at the bottom. But you can take that screw and place it at the hole. You don't want the screw to go all the way through the hole. You just want it to sort of engage. But not everybody has one of those templates. So if you don't have a template, you can take the screw again, the screw here. I'll get it on the screen. You can take that screw and line your drill up on top of it and eyeball that drill. You want some of the threads from the screw to be shown so it engages the wood when you put it in. So you can use you can use the template if you have a template, or just use it the eyeball method like I just demonstrated there. Put the drill on top of it, the drill bit on top of it, and make sure that there's some threads exposed.
Okay, great. Could you talk about the benefit of drilling pilot holes? I know we all know about them, but not everyone might know the purpose.
Sure. There's a couple of purposes there's probably several purposes for the pilot hole. The screw will go in a lot easier with a pilot hole. Also, if you're drilling a hole near the end of the wood, especially with thinner material, if you don't use a pilot hole and just screw into that piece, you'll wind up splitting that wood. So the pilot hole prevents any splitting because it gives a space for the screw to fill up instead of splitting the wood. Also, you can make sure that your holes are exactly where you want them because it's a lot easier to place pilot holes in there and they don't wander around the way a screw might. If you tried to drill in an area that had a knot, you couldn't start a screw where you have a knot. So you drill a pilot hole through that area and then use your screw. One other thing about knots, it's probably not a good idea to put anything in a knot. They're just not very strong.
Okay, we have a question about depth of the garden bed. So what depth would be optimum?
The garden box that we built is about 11.5 inches deep. 2x4s aren't always 2x4. They're a little bit shorter, a little bit smaller than 4 inches. With the cedar, since it's not dressed, it's closer to the 4-inch dimension, so it's closer to 12 inches. You really don't need much more than 12 inches of soil to grow most things in. You're not going to plant a tree in it. You're just going to plant flowers, vegetables, and things like that. So you could probably get away with even a lot less than 12 inches if you wanted to.
Okay, great. We have a question. For cosmetic reasons, would it be okay to paint or stain the outside of the bed? Would that affect the vegetables inside?
I don't with cedar and pressure treated wood. There's no need to stain it or to paint it. Just let it naturally weather. Cedar, like I mentioned before, will turn a darker color. So I think it'd be just a waste of time and a waste of money to stain it or to paint it.
Okay, great. We have another question about the finished picture of the box. We will show that at the end of the presentation, and you'll all be able to see that then.
There
Okay,
was one clarification about the size of the screw. We use number 9. Screw sizes come in various sizes. The 9 refers to the diameter of the screw, basically. What's important, though, is to have a screw that's long enough. That we use the 3 inches because we were joining the legs together, and those legs turned out to be roughly 4 inches by 4 inches. So we wanted enough penetration. If you used a screw that was shorter than 3 inches, it wouldn't go into the material deep enough to give it any strength.
great. Do you have any other tips and tricks about building the legs?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, building the legs is probably the most complicated thing in building the box. You need to use a flat surface. We started the legs on the temporary bench that I made there, only because you don't have to bend over as much. But when you get to the point where you want to join the legs to the sides, you need to move everything over onto a flat surface.
Okay, great. Let's move on to our next video, which will be building the box.
Okay, next thing we want to do is to move our legs to a flat surface. We moved over to the driveway, which is flatter than the work table that we were working on. We take one set of legs, and we're going to attach one of the 4-foot box pieces to the top of that leg assembly. That's what we're doing here. Put another 4-foot piece on the other set of legs. Again, make sure that it's flush on the ends and the top. Drill the pilot holes there and screw it down. We use 2 screws on each end of those 4-foot long pieces. Screw those into the leg assembly. Use your square to make sure it's squared. It's important that you get the square, those pieces square, because every piece that goes in after that will have to be squared also. Now we have the first set of side pieces on a leg assembly and moved it back to our workbench. It's a little easier than bending over all the time. And I'm putting on one of the 37-inch long side pieces. The 37-inch long piece is 37 inches because the wire fabric that we'll be using is 36 inches. And we want to allow a 1/2 inch on either side so the wire fabric doesn't stick out beyond the edge of the box. Wire fabric can be very sharp. We're going to put the 37-inch long piece adjacent to the leg assembly and at the end of the 4-foot long side. We want to make sure that where we place those screws doesn't go into where the 2 legs that you see upright there, where those 2 legs come together. You want to make sure the screw goes into wood, not a joint. Again, we're using our clamp, our square, to make sure the legs are square to that 37-inch piece. And once we have the pilot holes drilled, we can put the screws in place. Do the same thing on the other side of the leg assembly. I'm clamping the square in place. That'll hold it in the square position. Get the ends flush with the 4-foot side. Mark where you want where that seam is between those two 2x4s, part of the leg. Again, as I mentioned before, you don't want to put a screw into the joint between those 2 leg pieces. Now that we have 2 of the 37-inch long pieces attached to one of the leg assemblies. We can lay that back down on the flat surface, and we'll put those 37-inch long pieces, we'll join those to the other leg assembly. Put some pilot holes and screws in there to begin with. Makes it a little easier rather than bending over all the time to do this while you're standing up. And what I'm doing here is I'm placing one of those 37-inch long pieces temporarily on the ends of those legs, the bottom of those legs, to make sure it's 37 inches on both the top and the bottom. That'll give me a true rectangle.
Great. So I'd like to remind everyone that at the bottom of the screen, there is a red bubble that has 2 pieces of paper. If you click on that, it will open up the resources for this class, one of which is a PDF with instructions that you can follow along. And this will be available for download. Also will be posted on our Facebook page at AARP Michigan after the class. The other document in there is a tips and tricks for building the standing raised garden bed. So if you're looking for all the details and all the little tips that Jim has given us through the class and through the videos, those are all located there. We do have a comment. This is similar to what you were talking about earlier with the treated wood, Jim. So Mary shared, older wood treatments with creosote, woolmanized with copper, chromated arsenate, which contains arsenic, have been found to leach harmful substances into the surrounding soil over the time. The newer treatments with borate, borax are safer. Okay, and reminder, if you have any thumbs up from Jim, if you have any questions, go ahead and type those into the Q&A at the bottom, and we will make sure we get those answered. Jim, do you have any tips for us on building the box?
Sure. In the video, I talked about using that big framing square. Really can't stress too often the importance of getting things square. If you don't get your pieces lined up and squared at the start of the project, nothing's going to come out very, very square and very true at the end of the project. So use those squares and make sure it's all lined up. Once you have it lined up, if you have clamps, those clamps that I used were quick release clamps. You clamp your boards in place and clamp it hard enough, they'll stay there. And that'll allow you to drill the screws into there. Once you have enough screws in, you don't need the squares often, but you need it at the very beginning. And I also pointed out the joint between the two. Let me get the lined up here. The two 2x4s for the legs. There we go. Yeah, two 2x4s for the legs, and right between those is a joint. Joining one 2x4 to the other 2x4 to build the legs. You don't want to put any screws in that joint because there's no strength to the legs for the sides of the boxes. The 37-inch sides of the boxes that you don't drill into that joint. Another thing about screw placement and pilot hole placement, you're building the legs and you're using the screws to make those legs. You don't want other screws coming in from the sides to hit those screws that are already in there. In other words, you're going to be putting in screws 90 degrees to screws that are already there. So when you locate your pilot hole, locate them such that the screw won't intersect the screw that's coming in from the side. Otherwise, it won't go through.
Today, we are also sharing this presentation on Facebook Live. So if you're following along on Facebook, you can leave your question in the comments section, and then we will be able to answer it here as well. We have a comment here. The elevated bed keeps Bugs Bunny out. Do you have any tips on keeping Rocky the squirrel out?
Yeah, you can get mesh. There's various plastic meshes out there that you can cover fruit trees and things like that to keep birds from eating the fruit. You could place a mesh over the top of the box too. Um, that should keep most squirrels out unless they're really, really persistent. Um, so you can cover the box.
Okay, we have one here. A question about the square. So if someone has a square that's smaller, would they be able to use that, or do they need the large square that you used?
Well, I used a framing square. It's roughly 18 inches. No, it's 2 feet long by 18 inches. Um, the longer the square, the more true you can get the pieces together. If you use a small square, you just might not cover enough of the material to, you can try it, but it may not come out quite as good as using a larger square.
Okay. Now here's a fun one. How much does the garden box weigh when completed, not including the soil?
The cedar is fairly light. It's a lot lighter than pressure treated wood. Two people easily loaded this box that we built into the back of my truck. It wasn't much of a problem at all. If that was made out of pressure treated wood, like I mentioned earlier, those 12-foot, or rather 12-inch wide 2 by 12 by 8-foot pieces are quite heavy. You could do it, but you'd have to make sure that you had somebody that could help you. And you would never be able to get those into the back of a car very easily. We used my truck to move it to where the box is located.
Okay, we have a question about the rest of the construction and the finished product. So we will be showing another video finishing up the construction, and then at the end we have a photo of the finished product with plants. So that's coming up soon. I'd like to take a moment here to introduce the tool library that my organization has. In City of Lansing residents are able to use any tools from our library at no charge. We have anything that you would need to build this product, from framing squares to power drills to saws, and even ladders, rototillers, lawnmowers. And so just wanted to make sure that you all know that if you want to get the wood but you don't have the tools, you can still build this box. As long as you're a City of Lansing resident, we are able to loan you those tools for free. So make sure that you all know that. A lot of other communities have services like this as well. Ours is called the Tool Lending Library. It's similar to a library of things that you might find at your local library. Even some of the capital area district libraries have a couple tools that you can borrow. So make sure you look out for those resources in your community. We have a question here. Can rough cut cedar be used to build this box?
That's we used rough cut cedar. When you buy a 2x4 by 8 from a lumberyard cedar, it's not going to be planed, so it's going to be rough. So to handle it, you really should wear gloves. There's always an opportunity to get a splinter in the palm of your hand or in fingers when you handle rough cut materials. So this cedar box did use rough cut lumber.
Okay, great. We will now go on to our last video segment, which is the final assembly of the garden box. And remember, if you have questions, to ask those, and we will take those right after we finish up with this video.
Now what we're going to do is put the remainder of the sides on our box. The sides that I'm placing on now are the 4-foot long pieces. We attach those 3 on each side, and we put all of those on. Again, we use our pilot holes and 2 screws at each end of the boards. And again, when you place those boards, you want to make sure the ends are flush with the legs. When we have all the 4-foot long boards in place, we'll put the 37-inch long boards. Again, we're being careful that we don't put a screw in the joint of those legs. It's the same process we used for placing the 4-foot long pieces except that these 37-inch long pieces will go on the ends. So we turn the box over so that the top of the box is on the ground, and we're going to put the wire fabric in place. The wire fabric is rather sharp, so I recommend wearing gloves when you cut this. We have to cut out a square out of that material so that it fits around the legs. You notice that this is one of the reasons why we made those boards 37 inches long, because then we have a half an inch on either edge and set it in. What we're doing finally is to put the cross supports on underneath the bottom of the box. This is so that the wire fabric doesn't bow down too much when you have soil on it. We're putting in about roughly 11 cubic feet of soil in this box. Once it's wet, it can weigh quite a bit. Put two of those boards in, roughly 16 inches from the ends. Finally, we'll turn the box right side up. And this is ground fabric cloth. We'll cut that to fit inside the box. It helps to have a helper that hold one end of those. And the fabric will go inside the box and can be stapled to the sides. You can run that fabric up a little bit on either end and around the sides. That'll make sure that the dirt stays in the box. And the next step would be to put the box where you want it. Quite heavy, especially once it gets wet. So you want to make sure the box is where you want it to be. Then put the soil in and add plants and watch them grow.
Awesome. So here's a picture of the finished box. I know you've all been waiting for this. And cedar, one of the benefits is it's so beautiful when it's done. It has that really nice cedar color. And like Jim mentioned earlier, it also ages well, so it just gets better over time. If you do have any questions, please make sure, last call here, any questions that you have about the building of the box, keeping squirrels out, we do have a little tip here from one of our visitors. Make sure you get those questions in right now and we'll answer them before we go. Mary says, I buy and use 12-ounce to 16-ounce jars of ground cayenne pepper at big box stores or restaurant supply stores. The larger ones are cheaper per ounce. And then she peppers greenery lightly every few days when the plants put out new growth and after rains. It discourages deer, rabbits, and squirrels from eating more than one bite. Do not use Tabasco or hot sauce as the vinegar kills the plants. You can use ordinary vinegar to kill weeds though. So thank you, Mary. That's very helpful. I've heard that before, but I like the idea of buying the larger supplies. Do you have any tips and tricks, Jim, about the final finishing of the box?
Sure. One thing to consider, I don't know if I pointed it out while we were building, when we were joining sides to the legs. But if you notice at the bottom of the box, there's two cross supports that they go in the 4-foot dimension. When you build up the legs, they're basically composites. We used one continuous 36-inch long piece and then two other pieces that encapsulated the cross brace. That cross brace can be placed either on the inside, as is shown in this photograph, or it can be placed on the outside. It really doesn't matter, it's up to you. But for aesthetics, it's probably a good idea to get them placed both the same way. So in this picture, both of those braces are inside rather than outside the legs. That's one thing you want to consider. You also notice that the 3-foot legs come up flush with the top of the side pieces. Again, this comes down to using a flat surface when you start fixing the side pieces to the legs. The other thing I wanted to mention with respect to the wire fabric that's on the bottom, the wire fabric, as I pointed out, can be quite nasty with those sharp ends sticking out. When we cut the fabric for the 4-inch length, the roll was 3 foot by 5 foot. When we cut the fabric for the 4 foot long length, instead of cutting the material at 48 inches, I cut it at 47 inches. Again, to bring that fabric in a half inch from the side and you won't snag yourself on those ends if you walk by and get too close to it. So those are some things to consider. Also, if you're working with the wire fabric, when you unroll it, it tends to want to roll back up again. So I used my temporary bench and I just placed 2 screws on either end when I rolled out the fabric to hold the fabric down. And then I had a helper to help me roll out that piece. So I can cut it at 47 inches. So these are just a few things you want to consider when you're working with that. And also make sure that you wear gloves when you're working with that wire fabric. It could really catch you and you don't even notice that all of a sudden you're cut. So those are some things you want to consider. See if I have anything else here that might be useful. These tips and tricks will be available. One other note I had when we were placing these lag screws, and I showed this before. I got it lined up here. Well, you notice this is called a star. A star figure. You need the proper driver to drive those in. The screws that we use for the legs were Phillips, which is a different configuration than the star. So make sure you have the proper driver, otherwise you won't be able to drive these in. You can't use a Phillips on this. But when I place these lag screws in, I didn't bother counting them. You just want to make sure that you don't have any sags. Those 2 cross pieces that go across the bottom will help hold it. But if you notice any sag in the wire fabric, put another lag screw in there to hold it in place. Just don't put them too close to the edges of the board that they break out. Put the lag screw pretty close to the center of either the 4-foot or the 37-inch piece.
Jim, could you cover one more time how you attached the wire fabric? We had a question about that.
Sure. After we had the material cut 47 inches long, and I cut out the knockouts for where the legs would go, I started at one of the 37-inch sides, and with the box upside down, of course. That's when I started putting these lag screws in place. Get it lined up. I started 2 or 3 at that 37-inch side, and I just worked it out as we went. You go from one end of the box to the other end of the box and place those lag screws along the 4-foot sides until, and try to get it as flat as you can as you go. But work it across, and if you start it out so that the wire fabric is a 1/2 inch in from the outside of the 37-inch piece, it'll come out a 1/2 inch in. If you cut it right, it'll come out a 1/2 inch in on the other end also. So the key is to put enough of those lag screws in to hold it down flat. And then if you see a place that's bowed, add another lag screw to it and screw it in.
Thank you. Mary is back with some more helpful tips. So Mary shares that flexible fiberglass rods, like the orange marker rods for snow plowing, or bought at garden or camping stores, can be bent in a hoop over your bed to hold netting over the plants and keep birds and critters off. Thank you, Mary. That's another great tip. So we have a couple more questions here. If planting vegetables, how do you make sure that they are organic?
I'll leave that one up to you, Emma.
Okay, sure. So if you're looking to grow organic plants, you would want to make sure that you either acquire organic seeds or organic plant starts, which are a couple inches high, small tomatoes, peppers, things like that. You can usually get them at your local garden center in a special organic section, or there's usually also community farms that you could purchase them from, farmers markets. You can ask the people and they'll let you know if they were organic or not. Then once they're in your possession, you have to make sure that you are not using chemicals on them. So there are organic fertilizers and soil treatments that you can use, and they would all be marked organic at the store. So if you have any questions on that, you can definitely do a Google search of that, or just ask the employees at the store. Organic is a very big thing these days, and so they should be able to help you out with that. Do a couple more questions here. Won't the screws, probably the lag screws, go right through the holes in the wire fabric?
Yeah, they do. The wire fabric that we used had 1/4-inch square openings. And again, coming back to this lag screw, there we go. You can see that the head of it is sort of like a washer. And when you place that down through the, let me get lined up here. When you place that down through the wire, that washer, this is kind of difficult, isn't it? That sort of a washer head is going to cover up the wire fabric and it'll hold it in place. If it didn't have this sort of a washer head on it, it would go right through and it wouldn't hold the fabric. So that's why we use these lag screws, because they have sort of a washer type head on them. And again, we use 1/4-inch square. You can get the wire fabric in 1/2 inch, or even, I guess, even larger than that. But if you used a 1/2 inch, this screw head would not hold it. You'd have to kind of move it around to make sure you got a corner of the square to hold it down. But I would recommend using only the 1/4-inch fabric.
Thanks, Jim.
Also, the wire fabric is galvanized, so it won't rust. It shouldn't rust unless it's nicked or anything like that. It's galvanized.
A question here about using 4-inch squares for legs instead of using the 2x4s. Why did we choose to go this route?
When we did some research online to find a design that we wanted to build, we found this one. It came out on a site called Wisconsin Mommy. Interesting name. Their design used these built up 2x4s to make the 4x4 legs. And when you do that, it's more aesthetic than anything. It allowed you to take those 4-foot long braces that you see there at the bottom in this picture. Those 4-foot braces are inset into the leg itself. If you didn't care, you could buy cedar 4x4s, use those for the legs, and if you still wanted the braces, you could just screw those on either the outside or the inside of the legs, depending on where you wanted to do it. I think the leg, that brace, helps stabilize the bottom of the box quite a bit. So that's a good feature in this design. But you could use 4x4s and cut them to 3-foot length and use those instead of building up these legs.
Okay, great. And we do have someone here looking to start their own tool lending library. Go ahead and visit my organization's website, capitalareahousing.org. And we have an information page there that you can enter questions. I would be happy to talk with you offline about that and how you can set one up like the one we have in Lansing. It looks like those are all the questions for now. So I definitely want to say thank you to Jim for all of your work on this and answering these questions. Do you have any last minute tips or tricks you'd like to add before we move on?
Well, just to reinforce a few, make sure that when you start to put pieces together, use your squares to make sure that all those pieces are square. Use your fingers to feel where the edges of the pieces are. A lot of it is built by feel to make sure the edges line up. If you don't have a template to determine the size of the drill bit, use the eyeball method. Just lay the drill bit on top of the screw that you're going to use and make sure some of the threads show. This design used cedar. Cedar is a fairly soft wood, so it took the screw easily. we were going to build one for some reason out of oak, as an example. You could build it out of oak if you wanted to. Oak is a lot harder than cedar, so you would need to use a larger drill bit than the one we used for cedar, because it's really hard to drill a screw, to put a screw into oak. You would not want to do it without a pilot bolt. When we computed how much soil we needed for this box, it's roughly 3 foot by 4 foot and about a foot deep. So if you multiply those all together, it's 12 cubic feet. You really don't need 12 cubic feet because you have some area that's taken up by the legs. And again, you don't want the soil completely all the way to the top so it spills out. So we went with 11 cubic feet here, and from that picture, it gives you a nice little dip below the edge of the box where the soil is. So those are just a few things to consider. And when you build the box, make sure you know where you want to put it before you put the soil in. Because once the soil's in, you're not going to move it.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thank you to everyone watching for all of your questions. I'd like to hand it back to Karen from AARP Michigan to wrap us up.
All right. Thank you, Emma and Jim, so much for all of that. I know it was a lot, and I hope that everyone finds the resources at the bottom of the page and downloads the directions and the tips and tricks information. I know we had a little bit of audio issues, and I apologize for that. But I think for the most part, everything you could get understand everything. So I want to thank all of the participants online who joined today. Remember, you can watch this. You will receive a link in an email following this event, and that link will allow you to watch this or pieces of this, whatever you might want, later on demand.